Hello and welcome to the Gaggle, where we challenge and, if necessary, destroy media narratives. I'm George Szamuely. With me today, once again, it's a great honor to introduce Andrei Martyanov, who, of course, needs no introductions to Gagglers. He's a distinguished military analyst and geopolitical thinker, and has been an outstanding commentator on everything pertaining to Russia, Ukraine, and NATO. So without further ado, let me just throw something your way. I mean, one of the most frequently encountered comments of the last few days has been, well, if Russia was able to do all of this on Monday and Tuesday, knock out knock out all the big part of the energy sector of Ukraine. Why couldn't it have done it back in February, and maybe the whole thing could have been over and done with 7 months ago? What do you think of that position?
Oh, it's very simple, really, and doesn't require any special elaboration. The basic of any military, or for that matter, science of the international relations, is the fact that wars are not fought for some, blowing things, It just merely the means to an end. Wars are fought for the political aims. And Russia's political aims are not just Ukraine. People completely forget. They completely forget. That's what sometimes is difficult to explain. That look at 2008, Georgia, the first attempt of NATO on the openly challenging Russia. Mm-hmm. Then we have Syria. Then we have, Crimea. We have all of that. It's the huge geopolitical titanic struggle in its scale with the combined West and basically declining and imploding Pax Americana with globalism. And Ukraine, however important, but one of the fronts of this war, which kind of, thanks to all those political scientists, we got this stupid term, hybrid war. Mm-hmm. Well, every war is hybrid by definition. But that's the thing. People suddenly recognize that, oh my gosh, Russia could have done it. First, Russia did it to start with. It's just that the attention span of people is so small. They do not understand that this tactical minutia, which they constantly follow, oh, these two companies took this village, Russians withdrew from that hamlet. Mm-hmm. It's absolutely nothing. It's a local firefights. Yeah, they do involve a lot of bloodshedding and all that, but in strategic and operational sense, they are not that significant. And what was happening for the last actually 72 hours, today, Russia continues to pummel still there, including Kiev. But obviously, Kiev regime forbade now anybody to even post anything online. Is the fact that it's not just energy structural power of Ukraine. There are some specific points there which are destroyed. And many people point out that primarily what has been destroyed was Mr. Akhmetov's holdings. Mr. Akhmetov is one of the major oligarchs who supports the Kiev regime. And he was one of the behind the Maidan. Yes. And most of what had been destroyed was destroyed the Ukrainian capability to export electricity, energy to the European Union. That was the primarily target. So, and this will continue for a while. And of course, it also is all of it was tied to basically midterms. And because Russia obviously wants to see how United States react to all that.
Mm-hmm. But still, the question is, why didn't Russia do that in February? I mean, is there a reason?
Oh no, there were very serious strikes in February too. Make no mistake. There were some, and they were not only in February. They were also in March. They were in April. They were even in July, including the strikes on some serious transport infrastructure. It's just that at that time, Russia was pretty much on the offensive and capturing new territories. And this was viewed as sort of organic part of all that. But then suddenly we have this hoax, with the fraud, basically with the Kherson offensive in August. Then we suddenly have this, as they call, great success, which of course was not success, in capturing 2,000 square kilometers of empty fields in Kharkov. And suddenly for a month, public is like, they look at this and they see nothing happening, and like, oh my gosh. And then suddenly Russia decides to, for a number of operational, strategic, and political reasons, to do that. And people like, oh my God, they could have done it. Russia was doing this, but Russia also do not want to create along its new borders a complete humanitarian catastrophe. Because in this case, you might be actually not winning but losing, So, and that is why these attacks, which were, again, very specifically honed primarily at the energy export, basically infrastructure, they created so much impression that Russia could have done it. Russia was doing this, for a while. So it's just that after the months or so of the lull, so to speak, there you go.
Right. But the thing is that if we look back on February and March, when Russians mounted this offensive, and it seemed to be moving very rapidly, it seemed like they were around Kiev. And I mean, yes, we know that they had no intention of taking Kiev, but nonetheless, it focused the minds of Zelensky and his gang, and they started negotiating. I mean, for a while, there were serious negotiations taking place. Then there was no more negotiation. So couldn't it have made more of an impact had they gone in with a sort of shock and awe, and would have actually forced Zelensky and his people to negotiate seriously, rather than now say, hey, we don't need to negotiate. We can just sort of sit around and let things play themselves out in the Donbass?
We need to understand that those negotiations have been a diplomatic game. Do not forget who was representing Russia at that time. The person who certainly couldn't have done any serious negotiation, it was Mr. Medinsky, who was the culture minister. So there were not even serious diplomats involved. But even at that level, which was definitely for the show off, and like Frank Herbert in June, the forms must be obeyed, so Russia sent its delegation. And guess what? Ukraine was almost ready to do something about it. But then we have Boris Johnson flying to Kiev and basically screwing it up. And, so it was, how to say it, it takes two to dance, so to speak, And Russia was doing her forms must be obeyed part on this, in this respect. But everybody knew that behind Zelensky, and he is nobody, he's a puppet, really, was, of course, London and especially Washington, D.C. And as we were speaking yesterday on Cross Talk, it was, I believe it was Tom who correctly stated that United States is increasingly trying to stay away and to maintain plausible deniability. But until Washington says so, nothing is going to happen. Nothing. It means nothing. Zelensky is nobody. He's absolute zero.
So let me ask you then, what would force Zelensky to negotiate? Washington, but what would force then Washington to pressure Zelensky? Says this is endgame. You have to sit down and negotiate something. What would have that impact?
Obviously, resumption could be. I'm not saying that it will. Please don't quote me on that. But let me tell you, Biden suddenly expresses desire to meet Putin at G20, And again, not Biden, whoever is behind him, whoever, manipulates him. But the point is that United States definitely desperately need a ramp off. And once Russia resumes this drive, which is coming, and it's already kind of in the progress, but was more about stabilization of the front and exhausting further the remaining reserves of the armed forces of Ukraine and their Western NATO essentially units now. There are NATO formations fighting there. It's known fact. So that's when it will begin to come to the attention of people in Washington, D.C., that, yeah, it's about time to kind of start negotiating something, which still will be humiliating for them.
Right.
But the point is, do not forget what Mr. Medvedev stated 2 days ago, or three days ago. It cannot get any clearer. And when he says, oh, I express my personal opinion, no, the deputy chair of the Russia Security Council doesn't express his personal opinion on those matters. He conveys the point of view, and as we know, the main objective now is complete destruction of the Ukrainian state.
Yes. So then what do you think then the Russian government would settle for? What do you think they're now going to settle for in any negotiated outcome?
Oh gosh, I think so. We can seriously say that Russia probably won't mind, depending though the form itself, if Poland and Hungary and Romania take their historic territories in the West. And who knows, Russia indeed may come for the larger part of Ukraine, leave this central rump with Kiev in the middle, somewhere completely isolated from anything. And then we'll see what's going to happen, you know. But it is clear that partial mobilization was announced specifically for the reasons of the both consolidating of the new Russian territories, because they become basically a new military district. And of course, continuing the offensive to the west. And at this stage, as I already stated, obviously the Zelensky regime and Kiev regime will be demolished. And Russia would probably look for neutral, or I don't know, even friendly, most likely neutral. They hate Russians there very much, you know, but neutral, completely deindustrialized, demilitarized territory, which will be dealing with whatever, you know, growing vegetables and I don't know.
And you think the United States would accept something like that?
Oh, that's the other thing. United States is in no position to accept anything anymore. It's basically their how you call it, a sidelined pretty much, because the whole situation is being decided in terms of Ukraine militarily only now. It's not anymore. I mean, there are some back channels which are open, and considering the fact that even Jake Sullivan a week ago had to admit that, oh yeah, there are back channels. We're talking not only about strategic stability in terms of nuclear weapons, but we're talking about other things. And of course, they need to have this, project this tough image and everything, but we know what is going on there. And including what Biden today had to, or yesterday had to walk back on his Armageddon thing. And we have even Pompeo going, you know, that all this nuclear talk is completely reckless, you know. But they need to maintain this narrative that Russia is on the ropes, which of course it is not. But at this stage, it doesn't matter. United States right now, it will be my supposition, is desperately looking for the ramp off. And its negotiation of if Russia will even present to it any possibility to kind of get off this without losing of much of its face. Although I have to quote Scott Ritter here, who stated that, oh no, it will be Afghanistan 2.0 on steroids. I mean, it's already, happening this way. So it's, let's put it this way, let them negotiate whatever they can now, you know.
Right. So how do you envisage it? I mean, do you envisage as Doug McGregor that sometime in late November, Russia will mount a major military offensive, drive out the Ukrainian forces, whatever Ukrainian forces there are in Donetsk, and then maybe, I don't know, move on to Odessa and whatever? That's the scenario?
That's along these lines, yes. Do not forget that at this stage, for example, whatever is left in Donbass, it is left on the Russian territory. It's not Donbass republics anymore. So yeah, that they will be cleaned out, you know, cleared. There is they say grouping, which they have is a core size force about 40,000 people. What's left there, they will be obviously removed. And then, yeah, most likely the drive towards Nikolaev and Odessa. But again, don't quote me on that. The Russian General Staff has a very unorthodox thinking and how they approach things, because it is all of it, subordinated not only to military strategic or operational necessities. It is completely subservient. It is completely slave to the political aims and objectives of Russia as a state. And that could be sometimes very different, you know, in sense that Russia may stop and not go, for example, at this stage to Nikolaev or Odessa and do something totally unexpected, you know. It all depends on how all those huge number of factors will coincide and interact, and what the resultant force we will get out of it.
But I mean, Odessa, it's hard to see that Russia wouldn't want to absorb Odessa within the Russian Federation. That would definitely consider Odessa.
Oh, no. Odessa is certainly in the plans. There's no doubt about it. It is classic Russian city. It is city created by Potemkin, by Admiral Deribas. You know, it is Yekaterina's city, basically. You know, it is one of the most Russian and, of course, Jewish cities. You know, granted that, I mean, of course, this, I mean, wonderful, humorous Jewish, you know, attitudes have been pretty much removed. It's a very sad place now. You know, but it's a wonderful city, which of course is Russian and belongs to culturally to Russia. And of course, it is on the way to the land bridge to Transnistria.
Yes. And do you think that's also part of the objective, to create a land bridge to Transnistria?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. I mean, that would make sense, because Moldova is making all sorts of noises about Transnistria. They can't allow a crisis in Transnistria in the next 2-3 years.
And plus, Moldova also has the issue of Gagauzia there, and that's another whole other, you know, can of worms. So it's a very complex thing, and that is why it's like this. Not appendectomy, you know, operation of appendectomy lasts about 40 minutes, I believe. Well, it's more like the open heart surgery or something even more complex with the cancer, and they can sometimes last for 24 hours. You need to proceed very cautiously, considering those complex interactions of the ethnic, religious, ideological, what have you, factors in those places. So that's what we have today.
Right. And would they accept Zelensky to stay on in power? Would Russia accept?
No, I don't think so. No. After Medvedev's statement, and I mean, again, the issue is very clear: destruction of the Ukrainian state as such. Right. So, because Ukraine, as it exists today, it's going to be absolute. Well, it's Nazi prone, and it's absolutely a totalitarian Russophobic state.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. I mean, that if they allow Zelensky and his gang, like Arestovich and all the rest of them, to stay on in power, then they're just going to keep doing this. They're just going to start it up again within a few years. I mean, it doesn't make any sense to leave them there.
Absolutely,
do you think Russia has an alternative Ukrainian leadership in the bank? You know, like Medvedchuk, or even maybe Yanukovych? I mean, do they have somebody like that they might just say, this is an acceptable government for us?
Possible, but I don't know. And I won't count on Medvedchuk after his basically imprisonment in pretty much Gestapo, you know, that's what it is. It's Kiev regime Gestapo. He is most likely a broken man, and you cannot blame him for that. You know, they torture people, they conduct horrendous things. So I don't think so, Medvedchuk. Who knows, though, you know? But obviously, I'm pretty sure there's a lot of compromise materials on him now, you know, and anybody would break down, you know, unless you're some, you know, extraordinary man. So I don't see him, but who knows? Again, who knows? Somebody is being honed and brought up there.
What about the return of Yanukovych? I mean, at least it would be consistent with the Russian position, which is Yanukovych is the legitimate president of Ukraine.
Yeah, I think so. That who says that is impossible? Very well could be. Another matter, will he exchange his lovely, comfortable life in Rostov-on-Don in Russia, or wherever he is? Krasnodar? No, he's in Rostov, I believe. So to this basically, well, hellhole. Actually, Kiev looks like a hellhole, honestly, So, but yeah, very well could be.
Right. Well, because that's usually the way. At least if you think of the Soviet era, it was crucial when they removed Imre Nagy that they already had Kadar to step in. That was crucial. Same with Dubček. I mean, Dubček in Czechoslovakia. You had to have already an alternative leadership ready to step in. And so it's hard to think that they're not grooming somebody to take over from Zelensky.
Certainly, yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, certainly. And again, as I said, the destruction of the Ukrainian statehood as it exists today implies absolutely removal of, in the end, Zelensky and his cabal and whatever is out there, including people from MI6 and CIA basically controlling him. So yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
Right. Now, do you think Poland and Hungary would actually step in? I mean, they'd be very wary of pissing off the Americans. I mean, if they were to take a big chunk of Ukraine, I think the Americans aren't going to look upon this very favorably.
Well, we have to understand that we also, even the larger geopolitical aim of Russia, including the obviously, let's recall what was in store in the so-called Lavrov's, well, and then Russia's, so to speak, ultimatum in December 2021. Right. It was, remember, such close there, just removing NATO back to the borders of 1997.
Right.
And Poland, for all the craziness of its elites, and its government, they want this territory. They really do.
Right.
And in this case, well, there is another issue there, but Hungary probably will get it, So Russians and Hungarians are constantly on a very friendly terms, not only economically. Yes. We don't know what they discussed there, Yes. I'm pretty sure the issue of those places absolutely is being discussed.
Right. Poland's, of course, an interesting case because, of course, if Poland does take back these territories, Poland will become a very, very large country. It's not like they're going to give back East Prussia to Germany.
No, they will not. Yeah.
So that means the Germans are going to look upon this not very favorably. They're not going to be happy saying, well, why is Poland so big while we have to be so small? And then, like today we have this news that about this oil pipeline mysteriously, a leak in it. You kind of wonder, and particularly, and then the $1.2 trillion bill that Poland has presented Germany, whether Poland is somehow seeking to diminish Germany in Europe and to become the sort of the leading Central European power. A fantasy, but Poles tend to succumb to fantasies.
Yeah, it's Folie de Grandeur, of which obviously great Kareli Barnett wrote, Polish Folie de Grandeur, megalomania, which actually contributed to the unleashing of the World War II.
Yes.
And Kareli Barnett beautifully described this whole thing in his The Collapse of British Power, the outstanding
book. It's a great book.
Yeah, and so yeah, they can dream whatever they want, because they still, even if they get those territories are primarily agriculture and a very hostile population. But when people say that, and this is what I hear, again, make no mistake, don't quote me on that. I'm not specialist in those Polish-German relations, but evidently Poles hate Germans even more than Russians. Mm-hmm. And it's a flaming hatred. But of course, no matter what territories they add, if they add them, they're not going to make them great industrial power. Poland, for the last 30 years, actually have been deindustrialized thoroughly. It's primarily service economy with some basic industries. And while Germany, of course, right now, apart from having this Polish issue and Poland basically poking them, Germany has to look at the mirror, in the mirror, and take a size of its own self. Because they are being destroyed by the United States. They have been they have the floor wiped with them.
Yes.
They have, and they have Weimar Republic 2.0 coming to them. And then, of course, we're looking at more strategic issue of their deindustrialization.
Yes.
And that means Germany returning to their, second world status.
Yeah.
Not that they are upholding first one at this stage that went well.
Right.
So they have bigger problems than just dealing with Poland, albeit it is a huge issue.
No, that's right. I heard the other day some guy from the Alternative für Deutschland party saying that, you know, you have a combination. You have the Greens who want to deindustrialize Germany, and then you have the Americans who are also going back to the Morgenthau plan to pastoralize Germany. And then Germany's suddenly facing a real possibility of becoming a kind of rural backwater. So it's a strange situation. Of course, the Americans are very happy with this. I mean, that's part of their plan, essentially, to take Germany out. But you wonder how long Germany is really going to tolerate this. I mean, after whatever else, after 1945, they very quickly became a major industrial power. Within 25 years, they were back to where they were before World War II. You kind of wonder, really, is Germany just going to tolerate becoming a rural backwater? Hard to believe.
Well, whatever it is, but the powers stronger than Germany are in operation here. And obviously, you know what? They had obviously National Socialists at that stage, you know, jumping in, you know, with Hitler and, you know, usurping the power. And but there is no denial that Hitler's economic policies enjoyed temporary huge success, you know, but the problem is when you look at modern elite in Germany today, oh come on, you know, these guys are pretty much all, it's pathetic, really, it's pathetic. I mean, it's just, you know,
yes,
I don't even know how to describe it.
No question. I mean, you've got people like this Annalena Baerbock, the German foreign minister, the Greens.
Habeck.
Yeah, and that's right, Habeck, and they really believe in all this nonsense of deindustrialization and green energy and
not only them. My my litmus test is extremely simple. Nation which consistently has the Green Party or equivalent as a major political force and elects it, you know, sometimes higher election numbers, sometimes lower, but it's a major influence on the policy. There is already something wrong with that nation, okay? There is issue there. You have to look at it because basically the whole environmental movement as such, as we know it in modern times, it's a cancerous growth on the civilization. And yet Germans continue to, you know, but again, you know what? People deserve the government they elect. French can complain whatever they want about Macron. I'm sorry, guys, you elected him. Okay, live with that. Bear responsibility for your actions. So if you go hungry and cold, it's your problem.
Yes.
Period. Let's face it.
Yes. Yes, I quite agree. I mean, it's you really do get the government you deserve. I mean, you look at the British. I mean, they've got this economic financial meltdown, and they have Liz Truss, who's in charge. Well, who selected Liz Truss? I mean, you could tell a mile off, this woman is an absolute walking catastrophe. I mean, how can you have somebody like that as prime minister? Yeah, you got Liz Truss in charge, and you've got complete meltdown in the city of London. Yeah. But you're right. I mean, in the case of the Germans, you know, now they've had the Greens regularly as part of the government. I mean, they had it back in the 90s with, and which was part of it when they were bombing Yugoslavia. They had that Joschka Fischer, who was also German foreign minister. Yeah. Now you have this Annalena Baerbock. Yeah, I mean, it just really is an extraordinary phenomenon. They've kind of forgotten all of the things that had actually made Germany a success after 1945. You know, the Willy Brandt, Helmut Schmidt, Helmut Kohl, all that has just been abandoned.
Politics, yeah, and even Borrell finally admitted 2 days ago that yeah, the whole success of Germany was based, and Europe was based on Russian or Soviet at that time, cheap energy, affordable energy. Oh, absolutely. Finally, somebody begins to speak up the truth. And I want to add here, because I'm periodically being assaulted, so to speak, and accused of gloating over Europe. I'm not. Russians deserved Yeltsin. Russians elected this guy. And guess what? It brought Russia, So, but Russians learned, already in 96 on those elections, which have been stolen from Zyuganov effectively. We know this. They were already voting against him. And we know it all resulted in Vladimir Putin. And effectively, what we probably will know the story in 30, 50 years, that Yeltsin was effectively removed. It's not like he gave up the, But Russians paid the price for their stupidity. I didn't vote for Yeltsin. I knew they're alcoholic and just low class, scumbag, mile away. Many people did. Yes. But you know what? So, and Russia paid the price. Yeah. But they learned. The problem, French do not learn how many years they have those socialist governments.
Yes. Yes. Yeah.
And now Germans do the same thing, and they thought that Angela Merkel was a great leader. They really have issues then with understanding what great leader is, but it is what it is.
Well, that's absolutely right. And it's very interesting. I mean, you go back, the Russian Soviet Union, you have Gorbachev, who within 6 years, he managed to toss away what his predecessors had spent decades building up. Just 6 years, he just tossed it all away in return for nothing. The West gave him nothing and openly showed nothing. And then Yeltsin and Gorbachev were involved in this ridiculous Punch and Judy show, just about personalities. I mean, it wasn't about issues. There was nothing. No. All personalities. Who was in, who was out. That's what happened. And it's been an absolute catastrophe that where Russia has ended up, because after all, it didn't, this whole NATO expansion, anyone could have predicted it, that they're going to do it. Of course, then the whole idea that like Gorbachev, he believes in the House of Europe and that they're all going to respect the Soviet Union. Oh, well, we're all friends together. We put war on the back burner. It's never going to happen again. But of course, as soon as they, you dissolve the Warsaw Pact, they grab everything that's going.
Yeah, that's exactly how it happened, And again, as I said, Russians learned their lesson. And now they got immunized against all that. And that is why they're breaking off and writing off Europe. Obviously, EU will be destroyed. It will dissolve. And Russia plays remarkably, in this particular case, Russia and the United States have somewhat aims, coinciding.
Right.
So they both are interested in a complete dissolution of the European Union. Russia, for the sake of dealing with their much weakened separate states, and basically selling them the Russian energy. United States, obviously based on this absolutely ridiculously miscalculated plan that everything Europeans will be throwing everything America's way. It's not true. It's already not happening this way.
Right.
And it's failed already. But in the end, European Union is the absolutely useless structure, and it will die, the same as euro will die, and national currencies probably will come back, and then you'll have Europe of those small, relatively small states, which will be completely dependent again on energy, and you know what? Europe will never live as good again as it used to. Even 20 years ago, it's over for them.
Yes, no, that's right. Because of course they made an absolute catastrophic blunder of believing that they can bring to its knees a major energy producer, a major grain producer, a major precious metals producer, a major gold producer, a major uranium producer, a major diamond producer. And the idea that they're going to bring it to their knees, these small, vulnerable states, I mean, it was ludicrous. And you know, I mean, it seems like in terms of the European leaders, I mean, Viktor Orban will seem to be the only one who saw this, that this is nuts, that what the Europeans are doing. I mean, this makes absolutely no sense.
Absolutely, it makes no sense politically, economically, what else, security-wise. I mean, those people are, I mean, they're not jobs, I mean, basically. And again, well, they had this wonderful excuse. And here, let me serve as the devil's advocate a little bit. While there's no denial and culpability of the United States in, you know, pushing this agenda on Europe, but it was their decision. I'm sorry. You know what? At that time, after all, if you go back to the Ostpolitik, you know, of even Willy Brandt, and you know what, United States and through Reagan administration tried to sabotage it, but guess what? Germans overcame it. You know, they had political will and desire and means to do so.
Right.
And they did it, you know, and that's basically what precipitated the economic, you know, blooming of Germany starting from 70s. Now, I mean, come on, who they don't have Helmut Schmidt or Willy Brandt anymore. They have nothing like this. It's their problem. They don't have de Gaulle in France. They have this pipsqueak Macron, you know, who married his own mother, and you know, so it's like, hey, people, you chose that.
Right.
You are the ones who doing this, you know, so just live with this. I mean,
do you have an answer to that? Because I don't know the exact answer. Why is it that Europe doesn't have leaders like look, even Helmut Kohl, who was a Christian Democrat, even he defied Reagan. He continued with the gas pipeline deal. You know, the Americans thought, oh great, we've got rid of Schmidt, now we've got Kohl, but Kohl wasn't going to give up the gas pipeline either. Do you have any answer? Why is it that, that Europe doesn't have any of these leaders anymore?
I don't know. Well, it's elites themselves. It's the generation of the Western education in general. It is domination of the pseudosciences, you know, which is completely, part of it, I think, is, I would ascribe to the political science. Part of it is the perversion of the philosophy, because we have people who actually, how to put it? I don't even know that it's the only factor. There are many factors which define that. And of course, absolutely perverted study of history. There is no history, serious history anymore. I mean, it subsists on somewhere on the bottom. Primarily, it's narrative mongering. They take it's postmodernism. It's postmodernism. I have number of facts. Okay, let me juxtaposition that as any way I want, and this narrative becomes, you know, as viable. And when you have this relativist culture, and the culture where the truth is not knowable, which is of course completely false. Truth is knowable. You know, at least we can approach truth close enough to know. You know, most of it. When you have this type of culture, and we have the counterculture of the 60s, which demolished, you know, it had some positive, obviously, outcomes, but for the most part, it was completely catastrophic, you know, on the development of the European thought, European morality, and there we go. There we have, you know, just creates, hey, if you need a juxtaposition, if you don't have enough facts, you know, create them, imagine them, you know, make them up, you know, and there you go. And that's what we have.
Right. No, I think that's true. I think that somehow with that peculiar philosophy that developed in the 60s, it kind of derived from Heidegger, which was that even though Heidegger was actually a very conservative, very traditionalist person, but somehow that whatever was in Western civilization just didn't really exist. There is no nation, there is no culture, there is no civilization, there is no history, there is no man, there is no woman, there is no truth, there's nothing. So you kind of, people are just lost in this miasma of, you know, trying to sort of figure out what's going on. And everything is then becomes reduced to, well, there are these bad guys who are oppressing the good guys. So everyone was sort of becomes a victim. And there's really nothing really very much worth studying. So you have, you know, like Derrida, Baudrillard, and everyone else. They all sort of derive from Heidegger. You know,
Yeah, not to mention that Derrida and Sartre signed this age of consent declaration where they, hey, pedophilia is fine as long as, you know, this 12-year girl gives consent. Yeah, I mean, it's just freaking unbelievable, you know. It's and that's what we have today. There we go, you know. And it's even the beauty itself is being completely perverted, you know. We have ugly things being presented as beautiful on their own, you know, and okay, whatever, you know. So that's all what is happening in the combined West now. And this is, of course, never was sustainable, and it brought about this, well, not only ideological and cultural catastrophe, which it is here. We're talking about inevitably that economic catastrophe is the part of it too, you know.
Yes, yes. Yeah, no, I think that's right. It's sort of interesting also that how the most intense kind of warmongers, NATO apologists, you know, Russophobes, were all kind of on the left back, you know, I mean, they're not old enough to have been in the 60s, but say in the 70s and 80s, they were on the left. They were kind of, you know, they were against NATO, they were against the missile deployments. It's a very interesting, the transformation. And it may be that somehow what we call the left today has this mindless kind of utopianism. They took over the utopianism of Marxism, but they've lost all the whole business of the proletariat and the bourgeoisie and the means of production. And so they left with this strange, you know, like, you know, man and woman, you know, children, you know, culture. That's all that's left of that utopianism that they derive from Marxism.
That's true. And consider this. During the gang rape of Yugoslavia in 1999, the most hate-filled, you know, Serbophobes, people who literally hated them as species, you know, the hatred for Serbs was through the roof, especially in France, and primarily on the French left. And these were the people who were part of the revolution in 1968, you know, all this left wing and all this. And as already, I believe we already spoke about it. Solana, he was a socialist. He was a poet. He was at that time, he was the guy who was promoting this basically bestiality against, you know, a gang rape of Yugoslavia. And yes, you look at these people, they are filled with hatred. They are filled with this, I mean, the fire of the radicalism, you know, and they also have this, yeah, you're right, it's utopia. And when you look at this, it's like, it was probably inevitable, you know, and it happened this way, and we have to live with this now, you know, what can I say? But actually, primarily, Europeans now will have to live with whatever will be left for them and how much time they will have left for them.
Yes. Yes, no, that's right. It's a kind of an interesting, I mean, you know, if one thinks of the Soviet Union, one of its most deleterious effects was when it exported certain things to the rest of the world, like Trotsky. They kicked Trotsky out. Trotsky then ended up in Mexico, but he had a terrible influence on the United States because all these people, they came to see Trotsky in Mexico, and they came back, then they went back to America and introduced Trotskyism to the United States, and then you got neoconservatism. In some ways, like the Jews that were kicked out from the Soviet Union in the 1970s. They had a terrible
they had so many scores to settle. They had so many scores to settle. And I wrote about it actually yesterday, and I spoke about it, I believe, in Crosstalk too yesterday, that you have those people like this Menendez dude, you know, the senator who wants to punish Saudi Arabia. He is from Cuban descent. You have all those ethnic lobbies, and they make it to the politics in the United States, and then suddenly you have the Cuban lobby in House and in Congress in general. You have the Polish lobby, you have Israel lobby, you know, you have, and all of those people, they hate Russians too. And they go there, and instead of doing something for the general interest of the overwhelming majority of the American public, what they do, they begin to settle scores.
Yeah.
We're gonna be talking about Mr. Brzezinski, apart from the fact that he was illiterate to start with. I mean, there is no such science as political science to start with. He was very shallow thinker, so, but at least we have this guy, and guess what? Part of the what we see today are the consequences of what this guy was promoting,
Yeah.
and that's general the decline of the intellectual level of the American geopolitical thinkers, which never was to great to start with,
Yeah.
And yes, we have this whole, I mean, how to say the situation, the coalescence of those factors, and that's what we have today. That's Europe is living this now.
Right. Well, that's the thing. I mean, Brzezinski is an interesting case. I mean, here he was. He actually spoke with quite a thick Polish accent. I mean, so and Americans didn't really think, hey, isn't it a bit strange that we've got a man who's running American foreign policy? He talks with a thick Polish accent, and he has an agenda. He hates the Russians.
Yeah.
And then we've got the next generation, all those Alexander Vindman with his, with his Ukraine. And you think, well, how is it that people like that who come from Eastern Europe or the Soviet Union, they obviously have an agenda of their own, and they kind of worm their way into the US political system, and they're just allowed to run US foreign policy to fulfill their own agenda.
Yeah, as much as Mearsheimer, I don't consider John Mearsheimer a good military or geopolitical specialist, but he certainly left a good legacy with Stephen Walt when he wrote about the Israeli lobby, which is actually correct. And that's what happens. But many people don't understand. The Israeli lobby, while very powerful, AIPAC and all that, there is a very powerful Cuban lobby, which goes back, to Kennedy's times and all that. We have a very powerful, there's a huge Armenian diaspora, actually, So, and we, of course, have Eastern European lobby. I have this article from US News and World Report from 97, which is called Don't Ignore Poles at the Polls. It's about Chicago Polish lobby and other Romanian and, pushing for the NATO expansion.
Right.
Without even thinking about the consequences of what is going to be happening after that. But they succeeded. Clinton gave up. Bill Clinton gave up, not only because he was always a coward, but because he also needed those, voices and in those crucial, Illinois and, election districts, and guess what? NATO started to expand, despite breaking all promises. And there you go.
That's right. And something of the same happened in the case of Yugoslavia. So you had all these people from the Ustasha who escaped Yugoslavia after the war, made their way to the West, and then they started influencing politicians like Bob Dole. I mean, he had that woman, Mira Barata, her name was, her father had been a prominent figure in the Ustasha movement. And so Bob Dole, they embraced, oh yeah, Croatia, they're Democrats, they love freedom, they're imprisoned by the Serbs. And, people bought into that. Margaret Thatcher, she knew absolutely nothing about Yugoslavia, but she bought into the idea that Yugoslavia was run by the Serbs. This was a prison house of nations in which the Serbs had the lot. But that's, and of course, again, the Albanian, also powerful Albanian lobby, which also lobbied against the Serbs. But the worst of all is these people in the 70s, all these people like Max Boot and the rest of them, filled with this extraordinary hatred for Russians. I mean, I don't know why they hate it so much. After all, they managed to leave. No one else managed to leave, but they got to leave. But even so, they just absolute hatred for the Russians.
There are a number of issues there. Obviously, part of it are pogroms, obviously, but part of it is obviously in a larger cultural sense, because it was the only culture which really kind of dominated them, and dominated in a cultural sense. And there is another thing. You cannot, for example, any kind of like Max Boot or Julia Ioffe, they may say, and they can explode the tragedy of Holocaust very easy in the United States. You cannot do this in Russia. We all lost 27 millions, wiped out in war.
Right.
And then you go in, and for Russians, Holocaust is just the part of their tragedy overall.
Yes.
Babi Yar is like, it's Russian tragedy too,
Yes.
and not to speak of that, like almost 500,000 of Jews died as their and were part of the Red Army, many heroes of the Soviet Union there. So it's Russians do not separate it that much,
Yes.
It's part of it.
Yes.
But you can obviously easily sell this, in the United States.
Yes.
So, but with the Russians, you cannot go say, oh yeah, we have the Holocaust, you owe me, because
Right.
Russians say, well, we have our Holocaust own and much larger than that, So,
Right.
and that's the thing. And but that is why it's also a very serious split in a Jewish community, because obviously very many Jews, including in Israel, they know who saved, they know who liberated Auschwitz, they know who liberated, all those horrible concentration camps, and death camps. So but in the United States, it's a prevalent thing because it gives the leverage. It gives the leverage. It gives you like, I am the, protected minority, so to speak. You better bow to me,
Yes.
That's what it is.
No, I think that's a very good point, that Max Boot and Julia Ioffe, they play on this American ignorance about the Holocaust, and then they suggest, and Brzezinski did the same thing, that somehow the Soviet Union and Nazi Germany were equally responsible for World War II, and therefore they were equally responsible for what happened to the Jews. And again, Americans don't know anything like that, because as you say, if you try to do that in Russia, that's
doesn't work. Doesn't work.
Out of the question. But of course, the same thing goes with the issue that the Soviet Union supposedly persecuted the Jews. It's not true at all. In fact, it's the other way. People like Solzhenitsyn said, I mean, the Bolsheviks, there was a high proportion of Jews among the Bolsheviks. But in fact, in terms of the persecution of religion, the Russians were persecuted a lot more than the Jews were by the Bolsheviks. I mean, any religious practice was persecuted by the Bolsheviks.
Yeah, it's true. And but again, as I already stated, there is still a very significant Jewish. Well, first, Judaism is actually protected by Russian constitution. It is Russian Orthodoxy, Christianity, obviously Islam, and Judaism. 3 native Russian religions. So I mean, and it's, I think so for many of the IPAC crowd and Max Boot type crowd, if they have any iota left of the integrity, probably they do, they should be very worried. And I think so that's what's eating them inside. Russia is economically becoming a true success, and there is a buyer's remorse too, and especially when you go from New York to Moscow, it's like the contrast is so drastic. New York looks like a drab, dirty village, compared to St. Petersburg, Moscow, with its glitz and width and cleanness, and so, and it's just, there's a lot of that there, there's always historic jealousy, but and so to put it in simple way, it's very complex, but yes, they are settling scores and they will continue to do so. But I am on the record, the Russia study field in the West is a wasteland. It's complete fraud, pretty much. All those teeny weeny bits of real knowledge and understanding are far in between, primarily it's narrative.
Right. But I also see Russia as, in many ways, like the enemy. And why is it the enemy? Not because it's a geopolitical enemy, though it is to a certain extent, but it's culturally. I mean, it basically identifies with a nation, a civilization, tradition, and it's a message that has resonance around the world. I mean, it's when Putin said that in his speech on September the 30th, He said, yeah, I mean, many people in the world, you know, they look at us, they look at the West, they don't really like what the West is selling. I mean, you know, we think of the West, oh, Kant, Goethe, Newton, you know, Einstein.
You forget
that's
about
not
it.
the West.
Yeah, not anymore, not anymore. And then again, there is another thing which many people do not understand, and this is precisely because Russian history of the 20th century was Solzhenitsyified, because it was gulagized to the point of absurdity. The reality is Soviet Union, especially with the start of the 30s, and especially when Stalin came in, it was very conservative society.
Yes.
People cannot grasp it that it was a conservative society.
Yes.
And what Russia sells today, if you look at it attentively, it's some kind of the conservative Russian socialism, sort of, you know.
Right.
And this is a damn attractive idea, and that speaks to very many people.
Yes.
And that's why people don't understand, for example, in the relation to China and Russia, that Chinese, for all their economic greatness, you know, because they are definitely a great country and probably coming up superpower, they still have to do the military part of it and prove themselves. But in terms of the ideas, Russia is much more dangerous.
Yes.
You know, because it's well, we talk about Russian cosmism. That's the philosophy branch nobody even talks about. But of course, when you look at the Russian cosmism from point of view of Fedorov, Konstantin Tsiolkovsky, you know, and all that, it just it's unbelievable stuff, you know. And it is also conservative, obviously. And this is not what Europeans have become, and there you go.
Right. No, I think that's right. They kind of embraced kind of that as the sort of culture that we were talking about. But it's interesting that even the Soviet Union in the kind of late Stalin's period also was quite conservative.
It was.
Because he did sort of revive the Orthodox Church. I mean, did it during the war, but still continued with it after the war. I mean, it was Khrushchev who actually started pursuing an anti-Orthodox campaign. It wasn't so much Stalin. So it was still embodied a much more of a traditional society, contrary to the early Bolsheviks, like kind of Western leftists, like the early Bolsheviks. So that was
Trotskyites, all those globalists, and that's another thing. If you can even hear in Putin's speeches when he speaks about the situation with Ukraine, he blames Lenin. He doesn't blame Stalin. But there is another thing. Year after year now, when you have those polls, easy to look it up from some, even Levada Center, which is the foreign influence agent. Guess who is #1 greatest figure in Russian history? Stalin. Then Pushkin, usually, and then it begins to, difference between Putin made it top 5, I believe, but he probably will move up closer to Peter the Great and Catherine. He's in that area. So, and it's like, if you look at it, why? Are Russians want Gulag? No. Do Russians want freedom? Yeah, they do. And actually, it's one, if not the most free country nowadays in the world, But it's conservative country. It's conservative country. It dominates, towards this, and that is why there are so many people who support Russia, or at least are sympathetic to Russia on the American traditional conservative, and I don't use those stupid identifiers like paleo-conservative, neo-conservative. There are conservative people, which are American nationalists, and the rest of it are rhinos, basically.
Right. That's right. And as we've often discussed with Peter, I think RT made a fundamental strategic blunder when they came to the United States and tried to appeal to the left. The left was never going to find RT appealing, but the right was going to find RT. I think the right would find much in Russia that they like. That it kind of reminds them of what America was like, 30, 40, 50 years ago. It's a pretty nice country.
And that's why Russians love, many Russians, and this is not just anecdotal. You go over, things, and people look at American cars from 50s, America's style of 50s, and it's like this Americana, which kind of, I'm not gonna go to David Lynch's type interpretation of it, but truth is, I mean, Russians love it. They look at those cars, huge American boats, like, oh my God, so beautiful. There is a degree of attractiveness to this. It always was. That is why I write in one of my books, I wrote that Nixon definitely beat Khrushchev on his kitchen debate, for a simple reason, because America was living better, and it was producing the best washing machines and dishwashers, because it was like that, there was a time of optimism in many respects. So, and it's just the way it is, Russians like that.
Yes, no question. That era, the 2 martini lunch and the big gas guzzlers, that was a
beautiful, great burgers, man. French, oh God, amazing,
Well, Andrei, this has been a fascinating conversation. Thank you again for giving us your time. It was really enjoyable.
Oh, my pleasure, George.
And we hope to talk to you again very soon. So thank you. And remember, if you like the Gaggle, please like, share, and subscribe. See you soon. Bye.